I used to believe I had the kind of marriage people quietly envied. The kind built on Sunday mornings with coffee, soft laughter, and 1,000 little inside jokes that made us feel like we were the only two people in the world who truly understood each other. Every morning I'd wake before him, take in the sight of our sunlit bedroom and think, this is happiness. This is safety. We weren't rich, but our life felt full. A small house, a car that sometimes groaned to start, and a man who kissed my forehead before leaving for work. What more could I have wanted? Looking back, I realize how much I mistook routine for love. The warmth I felt came less from affection, and more from the comfort of familiarity. I told myself that's what real love was. Calm, predictable, steady. He didn't bring me flowers anymore, but he'd fix the leaky faucet without being asked. He didn't hold my hand in public, but he remembered how I liked my tea. Those small gestures became the threads holding together the illusion of perfection. When friends would complain about their husbands, late nights, cold silences, phone passwords suddenly changed, I'd smile and say, we're lucky. We trust each other. I said it so often it became a mantra. When I used to quiet the small voice that sometimes whispered otherwise, I ignored the way he'd glance at his phone and tilt it away. I ignored the work trips that started to pile up, the after-hours meetings that never seemed to end. I told myself ambition was attractive, that hard work meant he was providing for us, for our future. Maybe I was just afraid to question the comfort of certainty. I remember one evening when the first shadow slipped across that perfect picture. He came home late, smelling faintly of cologne, not his usual one. He brushed past my questions with a tired smile and said, "Rough day." I believed him, or at least I convinced myself to. I wanted to believe him so badly that I dismissed my own intuition, like pushing down a lump in my throat that refused to go away. There were other things too, little details that didn't make sense. He'd start wearing shirts I'd never seen before, pressed perfectly as if someone else had cared for them. He changed his phone wallpaper, a small thing, but it used to be a picture of us on vacation. When I noticed, he laughed and said he was going for a cleaner look. I laughed too, though it didn't reach my chest. Still, I told myself that love meant trust. That good wives don't pry. I repeated that phrase like a prayer as I made dinner alone more often, as I ate cold pasta waiting for the sound of his car in the driveway. When it finally came, I'd still greet him with a smile. I thought patience was strength. I thought silence was grace. On weekends, I'd post photos of us at brunch, his hand on my shoulder, his smile perfect for the camera. People commented, couple goals. Each felt like validation, proof that my marriage was what I wanted it to be. I didn't realize I was curating not just an image for the world, but a lie for myself. If someone had asked me then if I was happy, I would have said yes without hesitation. Maybe I even was, in that fragile surface-level way that breaks the moment you press too hard. But happiness built on denial is glass, clear, beautiful, and always one sharp truth away from shattering. That truth was coming for me. I just didn't know it yet. It started with the phone, always face down, always locked. Once upon a time, his phone would light up on the table, and I'd see messages from his colleagues or his mother. Nothing secret, nothing hidden. But now, whenever I entered the room, his fingers would instinctively flip it over. The first few times I laughed it off, telling myself he was simply trying to be polite, to give me his full attention. That's what love was, right? Consideration. But the laughter never quite reached my chest. It thudded there, heavy, uncertain. Then came the hours. He'd say he was working late again, that his boss was piling on more responsibilities. I believed him, or I wanted to. I told myself that good wives don't doubt their husbands, that trust isn't something you constantly test. But when midnight crept in, and his side of the bed remained empty, my heart began keeping count of every lie disguised as an excuse. I'd stare at the ceiling, convincing myself that maybe I was overreacting, that exhaustion made me paranoid. Still, each time I heard the distant hum of a car outside, I'd bolt upright, hoping it was him. It rarely was. One night I went to his laundry basket to wash his shirts. That's when I noticed it, a faint trace of perfume. It wasn't mine. It wasn't the scent of detergent or office air. It was floral, sharp, unfamiliar. My stomach twisted. I brought the shirt closer, sniffed again, then froze. My heart was loud in my ears, my mind scrambling to build an explanation that wouldn't break me. Maybe someone hugged him at work. Maybe the scent transferred accidentally. People hug, right? That's normal. Completely normal. That's what I told myself as I washed it twice, trying to erase the smell and the thought behind it. He grew distant, yet oddly affectionate in flashes, a confusing rhythm that kept me chasing equilibrium. Some days he'd bring home my favorite dessert. Other days he'd barely look at me. It felt like standing on shifting sand, smiling while the ground moved beneath my feet. I became obsessed with analyzing his tone, his body language, his texts. Every love you he sent sounded slightly different, like a word repeated too many times until it lost its meaning. But I didn't confront him. I was too afraid of the answer. I told myself that as long as I didn't ask, our life could remain intact. I could keep being the wife people envied, the woman who had it all together. Deep down, I wasn't protecting him. I was protecting myself from seeing the reflection of what I already knew. I started to change too. My laughter became quieter. I wore more makeup, dressed a little nicer when he was home, as if trying to remind him, or maybe myself, that I was still worth choosing. I told friends I was tired from work, but the truth was I was tired from pretending not to notice when he silenced calls mid-ring, pretending the distance between us in bed was comfortable, pretending that the faint trace of guilt in his eyes meant love instead of deception. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Pity, maybe, or regret. Then he'd smile, that same practiced curve of his lips, and say something sweet, and I'd feel the shame of relief rush through me. Because even if it was temporary, even if it was a lie, that affection felt like safety. At night, when he was asleep, I'd study his face under the dim light, wondering who he was when I wasn't looking. I remembered the early days, the late-night drives, the promises whispered like vows. I clung to those memories like they were proof that I wasn't foolish, that somewhere beneath this distance, love still lived. But deep down, I knew I was trying to save a photograph that had already begun to fade. The cracks were spreading, tiny invisible lines running through the life I had built. And though I told myself I could fix them, I could still hold everything together. I knew what happens when glass begins to fracture. It doesn't warn you before it shatters. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening. I had gone to visit my sister for the weekend, something I hadn't done in months. She'd noticed how withdrawn I'd become and insisted I stay a few nights. I agreed, thinking a change of scenery might clear my head. But on Sunday evening, I decided to return home early, a small impulse that, in hindsight, feels like fate pulling me toward the truth. I texted him that I was heading back, but he didn't respond. I assumed he was asleep or maybe still at work. I remember driving through quiet streets, the radio low, thinking about how I'd surprise him with takeout from his favorite place. I even smiled at the thought of rekindling something between us, of feeling close again. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed his car was already there. Relief bloomed in my chest for a moment, until I saw that the upstairs bedroom light was on. It was strange. He never left the light on when he went to bed. As I stepped out of the car, I heard something faint. Laughter. Not his, not mine. A soft, feminine laugh floated through the slightly open window. It was the kind of laugh that doesn't belong to strangers. It belonged to someone comfortable, someone welcome. My heart began to hammer, each beat echoing in my ears. I froze on the driveway, every instinct screaming at me to stop, to turn around, to pretend I hadn't heard it. But my feet moved anyway, heavy and deliberate, as if controlled by something deeper than logic. I walked toward the door, my fingers trembling as I unlocked it. The house was dim, quiet except for the faint murmur of voices upstairs. His voice, low, playful, familiar in a way that twisted my stomach. Then another giggle. My pulse surged, my throat dry as sand. I took off my shoes to keep silent, the cool tiles against my feet grounding me in the unreality of it all. Every step up the stairs felt like a lifetime. My breathing turned shallow, my body shaking though the air was warm. I wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation, maybe a relative visiting, maybe a friend, maybe I was misunderstanding. but I already knew I wasn't. At the top of the stairs, the hallway was dark except for the sliver of light seeping from our bedroom door, slightly ajar. I could hear him say something soft, followed by the rustle of sheets. My vision blurred, my mind refusing to process what my body already understood. I stood there, clutching the railing, my nails digging into my palm. I wanted to scream, to barge in, to demand why, but instead I listened, because somehow, hearing it confirmed what seeing it would only destroy me with. Then came the moment that cracked the world open. Her voice, light, teasing, I said, "What if she comes home?" And his reply, calm and confident, "She won't. She never does." That sentence burned through me like acid. The weight of it pressed against my chest until breathing hurt. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I wanted to believe it wasn't real, but denial had nowhere left to hide. My vision tunneled, the edges of the room spinning, but I kept my silence. I stepped back, one foot after another down the stairs, careful not to make a sound. The house, once my sanctuary, felt foreign. A museum of our lies. By the time I reached the front door, tears had blurred everything. I clutched my car keys so tightly they bit into my skin. My hands trembled as I opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. I didn't look back at the window, though I could still hear faint laughter spilling from it. It followed me to the car, haunting and cruel. As I sat behind the wheel, staring at the steering column, I felt something inside me break, but quietly, like the snapping of a thread you barely notice until the fabric starts to unravel. I didn't drive right away. I just sat there, motionless, feeling the hollow ache of betrayal settling into my bones. In that moment, I understood that whatever we had been, it was gone. And though I didn't yet know what would come next, I knew this. The woman who had walked into that driveway wasn't the same one who would drive away. When I stepped back into the house, I don't even remember making the decision to go upstairs. My body just moved, numb, automatic, guided by something I can't name. Maybe I needed proof, something my heart couldn't keep denying. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, the sound louder than it should have been, like the house itself was warning me. I reached the bedroom door and pushed it open. Time didn't slow down. It stopped completely. There they were. My husband, the man I'd built a life with, tangled in sheets that still smelled like our home, our shared years, our supposed love. And beside him, a woman, younger, smirking faintly until she saw me. The air was thick with the scent of perfume, sweat, and betrayal. For a second, none of them moved. We just stared at one another, suspended in that unbearable silence. He was the first to react. His voice cracked, panic bleeding through the edges. "It's not what it looks like." But I didn't answer. I couldn't. I looked at him, really looked, and realized that whatever connection we once had was gone. The man sitting there wasn't my husband anymore. He was just someone wearing his face. The woman pulled the blanket up to her chest, stammering something like an apology, though her eyes said otherwise. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand how long this had been going on, but my voice felt trapped behind my teeth. Every emotion, rage, heartbreak, humiliation, clashed inside me until I could barely stand. He got up, fumbling for his clothes, muttering my name as if that would somehow fix the wreckage between us. "Please, just let me explain," he said, his tone half defensive, half begging. "Explain?" I finally whispered, though it came out like a breath, not a word. "What could you possibly explain?" He froze. The silence that followed was sharper than any slap. I could see the realization in his eyes. Not of guilt, but of fear. Fear of what my calmness meant. He'd expected rage, tears, chaos, but all I gave him was stillness. I looked around the room, taking it in like a crime scene. The half-empty wine glass on my nightstand, the sheets twisted like evidence, his watch on the floor beside her shoes. Every detail burned itself into my memory. I thought about the nights I'd waited up for him, the dinners that had gone cold, the excuses he'd made about late meetings. Each one found its place here, fitting together like the final pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve. The woman shifted uncomfortably, whispering, "I didn't know." I turned to her, not with anger but pity. "You did," I said softly. "You just didn't care." Her face fell, and for a moment I saw the cracks in her confidence. But my focus wasn't on her anymore. It was on him. "I gave you everything," I said. My voice was trembling, but steady enough to cut through the silence. "My trust, my loyalty, my best years. And this is what you do with it?" He tried to step closer, but I moved back. My body shook, though I kept my chin up. "Don't touch me," I said. "Don't say another word." And then I did something that startled even me. I turned and walked out. No screaming, no dramatic exit, just quiet, deliberate steps down the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last, but also clearer. The weight of betrayal pressed on my chest, but beneath it, something else was stirring. The first flicker of strength. Downstairs, I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the remnants of our life. Framed photos, souvenirs from trips, wedding pictures. I stared at one photo of us smiling, our hands intertwined, and it almost made me laugh. The image was so clean, so perfect. A lie captured forever. I went to the closet, pulled out a suitcase, and started packing. Not everything, just what I needed. A few clothes, my documents, my phone charger. It wasn't an escape yet, but it was the beginning of one. As I zipped the bag, I heard his footsteps on the stairs. "Please don't go," he said from the doorway, his voice low, uncertain. I didn't look up. "You already made that decision for me," I replied. And for the first time, he went silent. Maybe he finally realized that silence from me meant the one thing he couldn't undo. The end. I picked up my bag, brushed past him, and stepped out into the night. The air was cold, biting, and it cut through the fog in my head. Behind me, the house glowed warm and false, the same way my marriage once had. I didn't look back. As I walked to my car, a strange calm washed over me. It wasn't peace, not yet. But it was power, the kind that comes when you finally stop begging to be loved and start remembering how to save yourself. And as I drove away, the lights of the house shrinking in the mirror, I whispered to myself the words he'd never hear. "You'll remember this silence more than any scream." The days that followed were strangely quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the hollow, echoing kind that settles after an explosion. I went through the motions of life without really living it. I'd wake up in the small guest room at my sister's house, stare at the ceiling, and try to piece together what had just happened to my life. There were no tears left, not even anger, just a dull, constant ache, like a bruise that refused to fade. Everyone had an opinion. My sister wanted me to confront him, to make him suffer, to demand answers. My mother told me to forgive. "For your own peace," she said, though her eyes avoided mine. Friends texted with words that felt rehearsed. "You deserve better. Time heals. He'll regret it." But none of it made sense when I was the one left standing in the wreckage. So I stopped answering calls. I stopped trying to explain. There's only so many times you can tell the same story before it starts to sound like someone else's tragedy. I needed space, not from him, but from the noise of other people's expectations. I didn't want revenge, not yet. I wanted silence. I wanted to understand how love could coexist with betrayal. How the same person who once wiped away my tears could be the reason for them. I remember sitting by the window one afternoon, sunlight spilling across the floor, and thinking how ordinary everything looked. The world hadn't changed, just me. I was a stranger in my own skin. Every memory of us felt tainted, but erasing them seemed impossible. You don't stop loving someone overnight. Love doesn't vanish. It mutates. It decays. It becomes something unrecognizable but still alive inside you. That was my paradox. Loving a man I could no longer respect. That realization broke something open in me. For the first time, I picked up a notebook, the one I used to jot down grocery lists, and started writing. Not to make sense of it, but to release it. At first, it was just fragments. He lied. I was blind. She laughed. But then the sentences grew longer, like tiny exorcisms of emotion. The pen moved faster than my thoughts, and soon pages filled with memories, questions, and raw pain I hadn't dared speak aloud. There was something oddly grounding about it. The scratch of ink against paper. The rhythm of my breathing matching the words. I wrote about the night I found them. About the silence afterward. About how the bed that once felt safe now existed only in memory. I didn't censor myself. The pages caught every thought I couldn't say to anyone. The bitterness. The shame. The small flickers of hope that refused to die. Writing didn't heal me overnight, but it gave the pain somewhere to live outside my body. And that made space, small, fragile space, for something else to grow. I began to see patterns I'd ignored. How often I'd apologized first. How quickly I'd believed his excuses. How deeply I'd tied my worth to being the good wife. One evening, as I closed the notebook, I realized the silence in my chest wasn't empty anymore. It was transforming. It wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the stillness before a decision. I didn't know what that decision would be yet, but I knew this. I was done letting my pain orbit around him. From that day forward, my silence wouldn't be a wound. It would be a weapon. And soon enough, he'd understand the difference. It was a Tuesday morning when I found out the truth. Not the version I had pieced together, but the one that stripped away every illusion I still clung to. I wasn't even looking for it. My phone buzzed with a message from a mutual friend who worked near my husband's office. It began with hesitation. "I don't know if I should tell you this." That line alone told me everything, but she continued anyway. The woman, her, wasn't some passing fling. She'd been around for months. They shared business trips, lunches, even late meetings that I'd once defended. My husband hadn't stumbled into a mistake. He'd built a second life, brick by brick, while I was home holding ours together. My hands trembled as I read the messages. Each word felt like a needle pricking open a wound that hadn't even begun to close. Then came the worst part, the gossip. People at his office knew. Some had even joked about it, whispered behind closed doors about how the boss's wife had no idea. The humiliation sank in deeper than the betrayal itself. I wasn't just deceived. I was the story people laughed about when they thought I couldn't hear. For the first time, my sadness burned into anger. Not the kind that lashes out, but the quiet, steady kind that reshapes you. I realized I'd been living in survival mode, clinging to a version of marriage that existed only in my mind. He had taken my trust and turned it into entertainment for others. But he didn't know me as well as he thought. I had loved him fiercely, yes, but I also knew how to rebuild quietly, how to turn silence into strategy. That afternoon, I returned home for the first time since the night I walked out. The house felt smaller, but not in a way that hurt anymore. I moved through each room like I was taking inventory, not of things, but of power. My wedding photo still hung in the hallway, our smiles frozen in time. I looked at it for a long moment, before removing it from the wall. My reflection in the glass caught my eye, and I saw something new there. Not grief, not fear. Resolve. I began collecting documents, financial records, joint account statements. Not to confront him yet, but to prepare. I wasn't leaving empty-handed. Every lie had a paper trail, and I would follow it with precision. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was reclamation. I wanted my dignity back, and I wanted it on my terms. Later that evening, I stood in front of the mirror and studied my face, the faint lines of exhaustion, the eyes that had cried too much. For months, I had shrunk myself to fit the narrative of the loyal wife. Now, for the first time, I asked a different question. What if I didn't need to be the wounded one? What if I could rewrite the ending before he even knew it had begun? The thought thrilled me. A calm spread through me like the stillness after a storm. He had built his secret in the dark. I would move in the light. I wouldn't scream or beg or make scenes. That's what he'd expect. Instead, I'd rise so quietly he'd only realize it when he had to look up to see me. That night, I opened my notebook again. But this time my words weren't soaked in pain. They were sharp, deliberate, steady. I wrote, "He thinks I'm broken. Good. Let him think that." For the first time since it all began, I felt power stir inside me. I didn't know exactly what I'd do next, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never again be the woman who waited for him to come home. This time he'd be the one left waiting, and he wouldn't even see it coming. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not my sister, not my friends, not even the well-meaning coworker who had texted me the truth. I'd learned my lesson about confiding too quickly, about handing my story to others to interpret. This part of my life was mine to reclaim, and I would do it in silence. The first step was control, financial control. I began by quietly making copies of everything: tax returns, account statements, investment records, property deeds. Every late-night spreadsheet and signature I'd once helped him with became evidence of how much I had built and how much he'd taken for granted. I opened a separate bank account under my name, something he'd always discouraged before. It's better when everything's together, he used to say. Together. What a word. I smiled bitterly at the irony as I transferred the first small sum, not enough to raise suspicion, but enough to feel like freedom. Next, I scheduled an appointment with a lawyer. She was calm, precise, and didn't flinch when I told her why I was there. "You're doing the right thing," she said simply. "Preparation is power." I nodded, absorbing her tone more than her words. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about dignity, about walking away with the quiet grace of someone who had already won. As I gathered paperwork, memories resurfaced, not the beautiful ones, but the ones I'd buried. Nights I stayed up editing his presentations, weekends spent managing his home life so he could chase promotions. I had built the foundation he stood on, only for him to act as if he'd climbed it alone. I remembered the time I turned down a job offer because he said we needed stability. How stability turned out to mean his comfort, not ours. Each flashback burned like a small match, lighting the path ahead. Every sacrifice became fuel. Every dismissal, every time he'd laughed off my ambitions, every patronizing, "You wouldn't understand," all of it solidified my resolve. I realized I had spent years apologizing for wanting more, for being more, not anymore. He still thought I was broken. That was the best part. He'd text occasionally, his tone cautious but condescending, as if he expected me to beg for reconciliation. "We need to talk," he'd write. I never replied. Silence became my answer to everything. When he dropped by the house, finding the lights off and my things missing, I imagined his confusion, his arrogance curdling into fear. Meanwhile, I moved efficiently. The lawyer advised me on asset division, property rights, even the company stock I'd encouraged him to invest in. "You were part of his success," she said. "Now make sure you benefit from it." I didn't feel guilt, just clarity. It was as though a fog had lifted, and I could finally see the architecture of my own life, one I had unknowingly built around his needs. One evening, as I sorted through old files, I found a photo of us from his first big promotion party. I was standing slightly behind him, smiling, holding his champagne glass while he shook hands with his boss. I stared at that photo for a long time. I looked so proud, so certain that our dreams were shared. But now I understood. I'd been part of his image, not his partnership. I slid the photo into a folder labeled evidence, not out of spite, but as a reminder of what blindness costs. As the days passed, I became methodical. I practiced what to say, what not to say. My movements became deliberate, calm, almost surgical. If he noticed the change, he mistook it for compliance. He didn't see the gathering storm in my composure. My lawyer called one afternoon with an update about the proceedings. "You're positioned well," she said. "He won't expect this." I thanked her and hung up, staring out the window at the late afternoon light. For the first time in months, the silence didn't hurt. It felt earned. That night, I wrote in my journal, "He believes power is loud, but true power moves quietly, and with every quiet step, every document secured, every plan completed, I felt myself rising above the ruins. Not to destroy him, but to free myself. Because the best revenge wasn't in breaking him down. It was in standing tall, unshaken, when he finally realized he had never truly known me at all. I chose a quiet restaurant, one he liked, though I hadn't been there since before everything fell apart. The kind of place with soft lighting, linen napkins, and a string quartet playing faintly in the background. It wasn't coincidence. It was design. Every detail was meant to unsettle him without saying a word. I texted him that morning, dinner tonight? Just to talk. No accusations, no emotion, just a line that would plant a seed in his mind. His reply came almost instantly. Of course. I'll be there. I could almost feel his relief through the screen. He probably thought the silence had broken because I missed him. That I was ready to forgive, ready to go back to the woman who once built her world around his comfort. Let him believe that. When I arrived, I made sure to be early. I wanted him to walk in and see me already there, composed, radiant, untouchable. I wore a deep emerald dress. The one he used to say brought out my eyes. My hair was swept up, my expression soft but unreadable. I didn't need revenge that screamed. I wanted one that whispered. He entered, scanning the room until his eyes landed on me. For a moment he hesitated. I could see it. The confidence that usually carried him faltered as if he couldn't quite recognize me. "You look amazing," he said, voice low, almost tentative. I smiled faintly, offering a polite thank you. Nothing more. That was the first shift. He wanted something from me. Approval. Forgiveness. A sign that he still mattered. I gave him none. We sat. The waiter poured water. Conversation started small, awkward. He asked how I'd been. I said I was fine. He commented on the food, the weather, his workload. Each word feeling like he was trying to rebuild a bridge I'd already burned. I nodded, listened, even laughed lightly at one point, but not the way I used to. My laughter was careful, detached. It was a sound of someone who had already moved on. He noticed. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed. His smile faltered. The power between us had shifted, and he couldn't locate where or when. "I've missed you," he finally said. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I made mistakes. There it was. The confession. The soft pitch of regret." I didn't respond right away. I took a sip of water, letting silence do the heavy lifting. "I know," I said calmly. "We all make choices, and we all live with them." That unsettled him. He expected tears, maybe even forgiveness, but calm was foreign to him. He didn't know how to navigate it. He leaned forward, searching my face for a crack, for some sign of the woman who once flinched at his absence. "So what now?" he asked, his tone half hopeful, half defensive. I smiled again, this time softer. "Now?" I moved forward. He blinked. "Without me?" I didn't answer directly. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a neatly folded envelope on the table. "You'll find everything in here. Financial details, arrangements, what I'm asking for. It's all fair." His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "You've already spoken to a lawyer?" "Yes," I said simply. "Weeks ago." He leaned back, eyes wide, jaw tightening. I could almost see his pride struggling to process what his ego couldn't accept. That I'd been 10 steps ahead the whole time. The same woman he'd underestimated had dismantled his illusion with quiet precision. For the rest of dinner, he barely touched his food. I, on the other hand, savored every bite. The atmosphere, the music, the calm in my chest, all of it tasted like freedom. When the bill came, I reached for it. "My treat," I said with a faint smile. "Consider it closure." He looked at me then, not as a wife, not as someone to pity, but as something he couldn't control anymore. And in that silence between us, I felt it. The moment he realized the balance had shifted forever. As I stood to leave, I told him quietly, "Take care of yourself." It was both a goodbye and a verdict. I walked out without looking back. The sound of the quartet trailed behind me like a slow, graceful ending to a song I no longer needed to hear. The Gala was everything he loved, grand, glittering, and filled with people who admired him. It was his stage, the perfect illusion of power. I arrived an hour late on purpose, letting the anticipation build, letting him believe that my presence would be a silent nod of forgiveness, an act of reconciliation. When I finally entered, the room seemed to pause. Heads turned, whispers rippled, and for a moment, even the music felt softer. I had dressed for war, elegant, precise, untouchable. He spotted me instantly. His smile was wide but uncertain. He came toward me, glass in hand, voice rehearsed. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, trying to sound casual, but his eyes betrayed relief. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied smoothly. It's an important night, isn't it? He nodded, relaxing. The arrogance returned, that old familiar mask. It means a lot to have you here, he said. You always made me look good, I smiled. I know. The evening unfolded with speeches and toasts, the kind of polite applause that masks ambition and rivalry. His mistress, his co-worker, was there too, standing near the front, her eyes flicking toward me nervously. She hadn't expected me either. I offered her a nod that could have meant anything. Let her wonder. When the CEO announced a surprise segment to celebrate strategic partnerships, my moment arrived. The lights dimmed slightly, the screen behind the stage flashing company logos. And there it was, the name of their biggest competitor. The crowd murmured. The CEO continued, Tonight, we'd also like to acknowledge our new minority investor, someone whose recent contributions and strategic insight have been instrumental to this collaboration. The spotlight found me, my husband's face drained of color. He turned sharply toward me, confusion flickering into disbelief. I stepped forward, calm and deliberate, the sound of my heels echoing through the silence. Good evening, I began, my voice steady. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but since we're celebrating growth, I thought I'd share mine too. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. I held my gaze on him. After a difficult year, I decided to invest in something that reflects integrity, resilience, and the value of truth. I'm proud to say I now hold a significant stake in Linden Group. The competitor's name drew a collective gasp. His jaw tightened. You what? Yes, I said sweetly. With some of the settlement money and a few investors who believe in character as much as profit. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. It seems the world moves on faster than we think. A few executives shifted uncomfortably. The mistress looked pale. Her hand trembled as she set down her drink. Oh, I added, turning slightly toward her. And since we're being transparent, it's only fair to mention that certain internal affairs affected company reputation. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small envelope. The board received these earlier today. Screenshots, hotel records, and payment transfers. It seems inappropriate relationships in management can lead to legal complications. Her face went white. Murmurs spread. Phones lit up around the room. My husband stepped closer, his voice low and sharp. You've gone too far, I smiled faintly. No, I've gone just far enough. He opened his mouth again, but the CEO's voice cut in, controlled, but tense. We'll address these matters privately. Thank you, Mrs. Hale. Of course, I replied, still calm. I just wanted to wish everyone success, especially in learning the difference between power and respect. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then steady. Not for him, but for me. People recognized strength when they saw it, even if they didn't understand the history behind it. As I turned to leave the stage, I glanced back at him one last time. He stood frozen, pride fractured, facade crumbling. The woman beside him was already stepping away, distancing herself from the ruin she helped create. When I reached the exit, the night air felt cool against my skin. I could still hear faint echoes of conversation behind me. Whispers of disbelief, admiration, fear. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a victim. I had walked through humiliation, through betrayal, through silence, and emerged untouchable. He wanted power. I chose dignity. And in that moment, as the lights of the city shimmered ahead, I realized something simple and devastatingly beautiful. I didn't just end his story. I began mine. The days after the gala were surreal. I didn't need to watch the chaos unfold up close. It found him everywhere he went. At the office, colleagues avoided eye contact or whispered behind closed doors. Emails that once celebrated his achievements were now muted with caution, subtle jabs, or gentle but unmistakable warnings. Gossip traveled faster than water through dry soil, and he became a subject of hushed speculation. The man who had stood confidently on the stage now reduced to a figure of whispered amusement and pity. His mistress fared even worse. The evidence I had compiled, the screenshots, the receipts, the hotel records, left little room for doubt. Within days, she was dismissed. I didn't celebrate. There was no joy in watching someone else's downfall. But the moment was satisfying in its precision, the way truth quietly revealed. Dismantles arrogance far more effectively than anger ever could. Everywhere I went, I could see subtle shifts in social circles. Friends who had once admired him now nodded at me with respect, recognition gleaming in their eyes. Business contacts treated me with cautious deference. The power dynamic had shifted, and the world was taking note without a single word from me. I remained composed, my dignity intact. That was the quiet weapon I wielded. One afternoon, I walked past a cafe near his office and noticed him seated at an outdoor table, alone. His posture was tense, his suit impeccably pressed, but his expression told the truth he tried to hide: humiliation, frustration, regret. He glanced up as I passed, our eyes meeting briefly. I didn't stop. I didn't gloat. I didn't even acknowledge him beyond a faint, controlled nod. Yet, in that nod, he recognized the victory he had lost, and the silence of it stung deeper than any confrontation could have. I reflected on everything that had brought us to this point. Months of betrayal, countless sleepless nights, endless rationalizations, how easily he assumed I would remain trapped by emotion, how little he accounted for resilience, intelligence, and patience. All the sacrifices I had made, the support I had given, now formed a foundation not for him, but for me. And that realization made the entire process feel almost poetic. True revenge, I understood, doesn't need chaos. It doesn't require yelling, public scandals, or dramatic showdowns. It thrives in exposure, in letting the truth speak for itself while you stand beyond it, untouchable, composed. The damage is magnified when the perpetrator's own arrogance becomes the amplifier. By refusing to react with drama, by letting the world witness consequences naturally, I became the architect of his undoing without lowering myself to his level. I saw his fall mirrored in small, almost mundane ways, his assistant avoiding his gaze, his phone buzzing constantly with inquiries from anxious board members, his friends offering quiet condolences rather than admiration. And all the while I existed in parallel, a calm observer, a testament to the power of foresight and restraint. At home, the memories of what had been, the laughter, the shared plans, the false sense of security, no longer carried weight. Instead, they became markers of strength, reminders of what I had survived and transformed into wisdom. I realized that power is most formidable when silent, and dignity when maintained, commands more respect than any outburst of revenge could. I kept journaling, recording each shift, each subtle reaction, each ripple caused by the truth I had unveiled. The act itself was meditative, almost ceremonious. Writing allowed me to witness without interference, to feel the satisfaction of justice without descending into bitterness. By the end of the week, his professional standing was shaken, social perception compromised, and the mistress removed from his orbit. And yet I didn't feel triumph in the typical sense. No glee, no hatred fulfilled. I felt clarity. The storm had passed, leaving behind a calm that belonged entirely to me. I realized then that revenge had never been about him. It had been about reclaiming myself, my confidence, my independence, my worth. And in that quiet reclamation, the impact was far greater than anything a confrontation could have wrought. I had been patient, meticulous, and intelligent. I had allowed arrogance and deceit to dismantle themselves. As I walked through the city one evening, past bright lights and indifferent strangers, I felt the hum of quiet power within me. He had fallen, yes, but I hadn't needed to push him. Exposure, strategy, and composure had done what anger never could. True revenge, I learned, doesn't shout. It whispers, and the world listens. The first day I stepped into my new apartment, I felt the weight of the past lift slightly, as if the walls themselves exhaled. It was smaller than the house I had shared with him, but it didn't matter. Every corner was mine, untouched, unclaimed, a blank canvas for the life I was finally ready to paint. I chose bright colors, warm yellows for the kitchen, calming blues for the bedroom, deep greens for the living room. Each choice was deliberate, a small act of defiance against the grayness that had enveloped me for so long. Light bounced off the walls in ways it never had in the old house, and I realized, with a quiet smile, that it mirrored the way I wanted to feel. Seen, alive, free. I spent hours unpacking boxes that contained pieces of my former life. Books I had loved, journals filled with sketches and notes, photographs I hadn't dared to look at for months. I sifted through them carefully, choosing which to display, which to store, and which to let go. Each item became a small symbol of autonomy, the life I had built for myself, separate from his shadow. Nights were the hardest. Silence can be deafening when it's unfamiliar, when it doesn't come with someone else's presence to fill it. But I learned to breathe into it, to let the quiet stretch and fold around me until it felt like comfort rather than emptiness. I made a ritual of lighting candles in the evening, letting the soft glow reflect off the walls, and writing in my journal. The words were no longer just a release of pain. They became affirmations of growth. I am enough. I am capable. I am free. With space came clarity. I started reconnecting with old skills I had set aside for the marriage: financial consulting, project management, client work. Slowly, I built a small consulting business from my apartment, taking on projects that allowed me to reclaim my identity and prove to myself that I could thrive on my own. Each successful pitch, each satisfied client, became a brick in the foundation of my renewed confidence. Flashbacks of betrayal no longer carried the sharp sting they once had. Instead, they served as markers of resilience. I remembered late nights spent crying on the guest room floor, the quiet humiliation of realizing I had been deceived, the weight of silence I had carried alone. But now, those memories were reframed. They were reminders that I had survived, that I had learned, and that I had emerged stronger. I began to enjoy simple things again. Morning coffee on the balcony, the sun warming my face, long walks through the neighborhood without a single care about who was watching, music that made me dance alone in the living room, free from judgment. The apartment wasn't just a physical space. It was a sanctuary for a self I had almost forgotten. Evenings became moments of reflection rather than dread. I would sit by the window, watching city lights flicker, and let the memory of the chaos fade into the background. Each day, I felt more rooted in my independence, more certain that my worth wasn't tied to someone else's approval or affection. The freedom I felt wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying. I decorated walls with art that inspired me, abstract colors that spoke of courage, framed quotes that reminded me of my strength, photographs of places I wanted to visit alone. Every choice was intentional, every decision mine. The life I had feared losing was now entirely in my hands. As I closed the blinds one evening, the city lights shimmering like a promise beyond the glass, I realized the final truth. I was no longer defined by betrayal, humiliation, or loss. I was defined by my resilience, my vision, and my courage to reclaim myself. The fire had burned away the illusions, but it had left something better in its place: clarity, autonomy, and the exhilarating peace of knowing I was finally free. Months passed, each day adding layers of quiet triumph to my life. The apartment felt like home. My consulting business grew steadily, and I had fully reclaimed the sense of self I thought I had lost forever. I had moved on, not with haste or anger, but with deliberate patience. And then, one late afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't anticipated. "Can we meet?" "I need to speak with you." I recognized his number immediately. My first instinct was to ignore it, to delete the message and continue with the life I had painstakingly rebuilt. But something in me, perhaps curiosity or the lingering shadow of familiarity, compelled me to reply, "Fine. Coffee tomorrow, noon." The next day, I arrived at a small cafe I had chosen for its neutrality. No memories attached, no echoes of the past. He was already there, sitting stiffly in a corner booth, eyes downcast, hands wrapped around a cup as if it could anchor him. The man who had once exuded arrogance now seemed fragile, tentative, stripped of the confidence that had once defined him. He looked up as I approached, and his expression flickered. Surprise, guilt, a longing for forgiveness. "You came," he said quietly. His voice, once commanding, now sounded like a confession. "I did," I replied evenly, sliding into the booth across from him. I let a small smile play at my lips, not mocking, just calm, composed, untouchable. "You wanted to speak." He nodded, hesitating, then exhaled slowly. I've realized everything I lost. Not just you, but respect, trust, and the life I took for granted. I was selfish, blind, cruel. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know I'm sorry. I listened, letting the words wash over me. There was pain in his confession, yes, but also a hollow weight where pride had once lived. I could see it clearly now. Remorse doesn't undo betrayal. It doesn't restore trust, and it certainly doesn't reclaim what was taken. His regret was his alone to bear. "Thank you," I said softly. He blinked, startled. "Excuse me." I said thank you, I repeated. "You taught me something I would never have learned otherwise." He frowned, confusion knitting his brow. "Taught you?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady, each word deliberate. "You taught me how fragile trust can be, how easily control can be stripped away, and most importantly, what freedom truly costs." I paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. "And I can afford it." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to smile fully, the kind of smile that carries victory without vengeance. It wasn't about hurting him or gloating. It was about acknowledging the journey I had endured and the strength I had uncovered. He looked down, shame and awe mingling on his face. You're remarkable," he muttered, almost inaudible, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile calm I radiated. "I never realized." I nodded politely, a gesture of closure rather than reconciliation. "It's all right," I said. "You had your lessons. I had mine, and mine were far more valuable than any apology you could offer." He opened his mouth to speak again, but I shook my head gently. There's nothing more to say. I rose from the booth, my movements deliberate, graceful. I didn't glance back. The conversation, the confrontation, the confession, all of it had served its purpose. As I stepped outside into the warm afternoon light, the city seemed sharper, brighter, more alive. I breathed in deeply, feeling the air fill my lungs with a sense of liberation that was both physical and emotional. The past, once a cage of betrayal and pain, had been transmuted into a scaffold for independence and clarity. I didn't need to look back to see his reaction. I didn't need to hear his voice one last time. What mattered was the truth I carried with me. I had risen above deception, regained my dignity, and claimed the life that was always mine to lead. Walking away, I whispered to myself, not to him, but as a testament to the journey, "You taught me what freedom costs, and I can afford it." And with that, I stepped into the sunlight, unburdened, radiant, and finally truly free. I want to take a moment to speak directly, not about what happened to me, but about what it taught me, what it can teach anyone who has felt betrayed, discarded, or underestimated. Betrayal is brutal, and it can make you question everything. About yourself, your judgment, your worth, your ability to trust. I felt all of that. I remember the nights when I thought the pain would never ease, when every memory felt like a fresh wound. But here's the truth I learned. Betrayal doesn't define you. It doesn't measure your value, and it certainly doesn't have the power to determine your future unless you let it. I also learned that silence, real, deliberate silence, can be a strength. Walking away quietly, without drama or spectacle, can be more powerful than any confrontation. There's an elegance in restraint, a dignity in patience. People often underestimate how much control we have when we choose not to react impulsively. I discovered that holding my composure, planning carefully, and moving deliberately allowed me to reclaim my life with clarity and purpose. My quiet wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the small, steady decisions we make for ourselves. The choices to prioritize our peace, to protect our dignity, to rebuild from the ground up. My independence, my business, my apartment, even the simple rituals of daily life. They became symbols of resilience. Every step I took, every plan I executed, reminded me that I am capable of creating a life that is mine alone. without needing validation from someone who betrayed me. I want anyone listening to know that being hurt doesn't mean you are broken. It doesn't mean you are unworthy of love, respect, or happiness. Pain is temporary. Wisdom is permanent. The lessons hidden inside heartbreak, about boundaries, self-worth, and perseverance, are what shape us into stronger, more discerning versions of ourselves. And yes, it takes time. It takes reflection. It takes patience. But the transformation is worth every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. By the end, I realized that the life I had been building around someone else's needs could be rebuilt entirely around my own. I am not defined by the betrayal I endured, but by how I responded to it. I chose growth over resentment, strategy over impulse, dignity over chaos. And in that choice, I found freedom, strength, and ultimately, joy. So, to anyone out there who has felt deceived or undervalued, your worth is not contingent on someone else's actions. Your power lies in your choices, your resilience, and your ability to rise above the pain. You can emerge stronger, wiser, and more whole than ever before. I did, and you can too. Remember this: the person who betrays you teaches you lessons, whether they know it or not. The fire they start can either consume you or forge you. I chose to be forged. And now, I move forward, unshaken, radiant, and free. Let your story end not with bitterness, but with empowerment. You are stronger than you think, and your life, your real life, is waiting for you.